I spent a lot of my 20s just kind of grasping at straws. Like I trained as a butcher. I worked in wine retail for a really, really long time. I worked a couple of food media internships, which I also hated. And eventually kind of started throwing these sort of impromptu dinner parties out of my apartment. And that was kind of the beginning of like, what is this? Is this a job? Where could this go?
I'm Drew Lang.
I'm Robbie Arps.
You're listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Jen Monroe, a chef, artist, and food designer whose company Bad Taste is committed to exploring new ways of thinking about food and consumption, approaching food as fantasy and as a transportive medium. We hear about Jen's journey in the world of food and design. She describes what she does as visually centric cooking, or cooking for the eyes. She curates events with food at the center in a visual and spatial capacity. Feeling, form, and color are through lines in her work. She's a creative and a business owner who consistently struggles with the conflicts inherent to simultaneously holding these dual roles. Here's our conversation with Jen Monroe. Jen, welcome to the Brick and Wonder podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start out hearing about your background and what it is that you do.
Yes, my job title is a great source of consternation. On my loftier days, I refer to myself as a food designer. Some days I feel closer to a cook. Some days I feel closer to a craftsman. Many days I feel closer to a professional schlepper. But what I do is effectively at the intersection of visual art and cooking. So most of my clients are brands that want me to sort of help visually storytell for them through food. Mostly I cook for events, and mostly I'm cooking food that is meant to be enjoyed with the eye just as much as it is with the mouth.
How does one find themselves, one as in you, in that world?
Yeah, I call it not even failing upward, but like failing laterally. Like failing out of kitchens was kind of step one for me.
What does failing look like?
Realizing that I could not hack it in restaurant kitchens, that I was not good at it, and it was not good for me, and it just was not going to work as a long-term career. But knowing that I, really loved food and wanted it to be my career path, but not really being sure what that would look like. I started cooking this way maybe 12, 13 years ago. And at the time, the culinary landscape looked really, really different from the way it does now. And at the time, this wasn't really a viable job title. There were maybe one or two other people who were kind of dancing around the outskirts of it, but it didn't really have a formal title or it wasn't a job that little girls were growing up wanting to do. So it was a pretty long and slow process of kind of, forging a path through mud, very much in tandem with social media coming online too.
And when you say cooking this way, what do you mean?
I would say visually centric cooking.
Tell us about that.
Sure. I mean, it's a little strange to say that because people have been cooking for the eyes forever. And, I immediately think of, kings in ancient Rome and the visually ornate feasts of centuries gone by. Like this is not a new idea that we can cook for the eyes, but it has definitely taken a much more predominant form as Instagram and TikTok have become kind of primary ways of people engaging with the world. And so that's kind of what I mean is really thinking about, food as a visual art form as well as one that, lives on a plate at a restaurant.
And when you say the culinary scene looked very different back then, in what sense was it different?
The food media landscape was really different. When I was going through school, I thought I wanted to be a food writer. And I remember kind of looking around and thinking like, if I want to be a food writer, my job is going to be coming up with like 10 ways to make chicken for dinner tonight, and like that's going to be it. And it didn't really feel like a lot of people were doing things that were more avant-garde or more challenging or more weird. There was Lucky Peach. I don't know if either of you know that magazine. It no longer exists, but that was kind of like the first gasp of like, we're trying to do something a little bit edgier in the food scene and maybe it could have legs in a more mainstream capacity. But other than that, there weren't really anyone who was making more challenging or more strange or more out there food content. There just wasn't really a precedent for it and there wasn't really a demand for it. And so much of what I do now is events that kind of place food at its center. Those events weren't really happening in the same way, 12, 13, 15 years ago. Honestly, even 5 years ago, like so much has changed in the last 5 years in terms of treating food. And I think this is very much, where this greater conversation gets tied in, is like treating food as a place, treating food as an environment, treating food as something that is worth kind of centering an event around in a visual and spatial capacity.
And what is your background? Did you go to culinary school? Did you study the arts?
Yeah, I went to liberal arts college. I have an English degree, so I write.
Just like Drew.
Yeah, you too. So, we both write great emails, and I'm sure that's served you well in some ways too. Yeah, I grew up thinking I wanted to write professionally in some capacity, and was disabused of that dream very quickly. But, while I was in school, I caught the food bug. The school that I went to had a really amazing extracurricular supper club group where they just threw like budget at us to throw these really ornate kind of Baroque dinner parties. And I started staging in restaurants around the same time, which is where I learned that I didn't want to do that anymore. But I also kind of, learned the fundamentals of how to cook in professional capacities, which was really exciting and really hard and really fun.
What are the component parts of your artistry, right? Like when you're thinking about putting a meal together that then ties into an event and an experience. Tell us about that and how you think about it.
I think feeling and color are kind of the first avenues through which, when we're talking about parts, those are like sort of the most integral parts for me. I always think about food and color, and that was very much how I got started, was throwing these monochromatic dinner parties where all the food was the same color, and I have since veered very far away from that and, am much less dogmatic about it now, but I think color and shape and scale are like really huge aspects of how I think about food and how I build a menu. And feeling, is what do you want the food to make people feel when they see it, when they eat it, when they look at it, when you're sort of confronted by it in a space. What is it supposed to evoke? And then, of course, now, since most of my work kind of exists in a commercial capacity, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, is, you're also, of course, trying to engage your client's narrative and sort of figure out how to make that coexist with your own personal agenda at the same time.
And who are you collaborating with, right? So, or do you own the entire process, the entire landscape of an event? So, is everything associated with the styling of the meal yours, or, do the chairs and the table and the plateware and cutlery belong to someone who's collaborating with you? And then what about the space itself?
Sure, that's a really good question. Usually the people who hire me are producers who are working for the client, and they're usually event producers who have, their own agenda and their own sets of experiences and their own expertise, which is both good and bad. It makes less work for me if I'm not thinking about like, where do the chairs come from and like, what is the venue rental? So usually I'm kind of existing within someone else's like event planning framework, and my job is usually pretty food centric. Occasionally people want me to sort of be more involved with every sort of brick of the process. And I'm happy to do that because I like control. But at the end of the day, you're usually kind of working in tandem with someone who handles the extra food aspects of the project.
And what are some of the most memorable events that you've put on? Tell us about those, and maybe describe to us what the experience ended up being like for the participants that was consistent with what you intended and what was different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, so much of what I do is variables that you may or may not have complete control over. And at this very moment, I'm thinking about a project I did last weekend in the Hamptons, which I'm not going to get into the gory details of because it's not a good example of anything you just asked about, but it was kind of a crash course in like everything going wrong, which does happen. And I'm sure
I'm very curious about that.
Yeah. I mean, food is really technical. Event throwing is really logistics. So, I mean, I can give you like the short answer, which was like 500 person party, outdoor event, no kitchen infrastructure. So we're working out of like field kitchens that we've built in air-conditioned tents. Our refrigerator space is a refrigerated truck that we've brought in from New York City. Air conditioning going out, refrigerated truck going out. It's raining outside, which is where the event is. There's no plumbing, like just all of these kind of like crumbles of infrastructure. That's kind of what I mean by like things outside of your control do happen. But that's not a good example of what Drew was asking about in terms of events that were memorable and what they did for the guests who were attending them. A better example of something that I think offered something unusual to guests, I did a project in 2019, which was in collaboration with an artist named Marina Zurkow. She's a visual artist, but her work very much centers around, environmentalism and climate. And often how food and agriculture and dietary choices, kind of intersect with those things. And we did a project together that was an 100 square foot edible map of New York City. And it was kind of structured like a game where participants, had different prompts that they had to sort of move through and eat simultaneously. But what was exciting about it for me was that we built these edible maps where, they were effectively these kind of like crudité hummus landscapes that were built to resemble New York. And as people started eating through them, they were revealing that underneath the food was a layer of plexiglass with an actual map of New York City. So you could sort of scrape your way off of it and realize like, oh, that's the Gowanus Canal. Oh, I'm actually standing at JFK right now. Like, oh, this is, the Whole Foods in Union Square, whatever it is. So that was really fun. And we got to set up these kind of like overhead bird's eye view cameras of, how people were engaging with the food and what people sort of go for first, which was actually really like useful field research for me because I never get to like fully eavesdrop on how and what people are eating or saying or, what they go for first. So it was a really cool like time-lapse video to watch, like, oh, people are really attracted to this thing and like people are really kind of clustered around this area and like that food went first and fastest.
I would have not thought ever to eat something near the Gowanus Canal. But
nor I, nor would I want to.
All new meaning. I'm very curious about, and I think we are very curious in this podcast about how people react to challenges and failure. The built environment, I think, has a lot of parallels with what you're talking about with regard to the event production. Mm-hmm. It's a cornucopia of logistics.
Things you can't always control, yep.
And things you can't always control. And you mentioned, serial failures and how you reacted to that. I think I and many of the folks who listen to this podcast would be curious, how those failures propelled you versus stifled you. How do you think you reacted to those things? How do you react to them now? How are they fueling, your progression through your career?
I feel really grateful that I had a lot of failure at a young age because I think you have more stamina at that age and maybe a little bit less ego. I don't know. I don't know if that's universal for everyone, but I think it was just such a necessary part of the learning process, especially because, what I didn't realize was that I was kind of inventing a new form for myself to work in. And when you're building anything out that doesn't exist in your own purview yet, like inevitably you're just going to mess it up again and again and again. And that's kind of the only way, the only way is through the fire. So it was really necessary and it's still necessary. Even this like event that I did last weekend was just like, it really felt like a final boss of event production. And I learned so much specifically about things I don't want to do, but it's really important. It's obviously really trite to say this, but it's just the only kind of way that you can get better. And I like to think that the shades of failure that I experienced now as someone who's been doing this for a little bit longer period of time are more marginal than they used to be. I like to think that the failures are less catastrophic and less glaring to people who aren't me. But, you're always sort of noticing like, oh, that could have been better. And I recently was scrolling through my phone looking for something and I got sort of like jump scared by a picture of my own food from maybe 8 years ago or something, and I just couldn't believe how awful it looked. And it was from an event that I had been really proud of and the client seemed really receptive to. And at the time I remember kind of thinking like, boy, what a good job I did. And I have compassion for my younger self and I'm not mad at her, but I look at that photo and I go like, oh my God, I can't believe I served that to people and like felt good about it. So, it's just necessary. And it's also a huge part of finding your style, finding your language, finding your skill sets and really honing them. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to fail in smaller and smaller ways, hopefully.
What about the journey that you're on? Where are you going, right? What are your goals, your ambitions? What does that look like? You mentioned before we started recording that you're in the process of building out a commercial kitchen. Mm-hmm. Presumably you're scaling up in some sense.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess one that anyone starts to ask once you like kind of attain some form of stability and have proven to yourself that this is a viable career path or business model or however you want to frame it is like, now what? I'll be totally honest that a big part of what fuels the direction I'm going in is the awareness that I cannot like physically continue to do really demanding work for the rest of my life. It's just not going to work. And what I do is quite physically demanding right now.
Can you talk a little bit about that for
Sure.
folks who aren't in that world?
Yeah, I mean, cooking in any professional capacity usually means standing for really, really long periods of time. But what I do, which at the heart of it is you could say that it's catering effectively. It's a lot of moving stuff around. It's a lot of schlepping. And because what I do is a lot of the menus that I write involve really fiddly, detailed, specific work that I have decided that I'm the only person alive who knows how to do them. It means that I am doing a disproportionate amount of the physical labor myself. And if anyone is staying up till 3 a.m. doing some insane detailed project, it's me. And it is fully a prison of my own design. I recognize that, but it's one that I cannot live in that much longer because, my body's not gonna do it forever. So right now I'm in a stage of sort of trying to figure out how we scale this in a way that doesn't harm me and, what this looks like for the rest of my life. And, I have zero business background. So it's been a real crash course in like figuring out how to run a business, particularly one that doesn't really have a lot of clear business models or like paths to success. So that's been a big part of trying to figure out where I'm going. The more like fun answer to that question is that one of my dearly held dreams and ambitions is to food style like a period film. I particularly think about, there's a Martin Scorsese movie called Age of Innocence, and I think I don't know if anyone here has seen it, but that's exactly the kind of movie that I would love to design food for. It's not necessarily a food movie, but it's a Gilded Age story, and so the food is all really baroque and beautiful and ornate and kind of functions as this like background character to all these, New York society scenes and experiences that are happening. And I've always aspired to be able to do something like that. So that's the fun dream.
Love it.
And how are you taking into something that's a little bit less fun? But I think many of us come into this industry, we all come into this industry with different degrees of business acumen. I don't think business is necessarily the most common pathway into the broader industry,
or any kind of creative work, really.
Any sort of creative work. And so turning our emotional, aesthetic, creative desires into a functioning business is often something we have to figure out for a variety of reasons. Yours is additionally so because the business model itself isn't fairly established. How are you going about that? Do you have advisors and do you have time to reflect given how much time you put into these events? How are you carving out time to work on your business rather than for it?
Yeah, it's a cool question and one that I often feel that we're not really supposed to talk about because it's not very chic, right? To be like, I'm looking at P&L spreadsheets and trying to figure out how to make this thing have legs. And it's tough because what I set out to do and what I still care about is make food that is so deeply resistant to having any kind of meaningful profit or to being scalable or to making any kind of business sense at all. I want to only make things that are extremely bespoke, extremely labor intensive, extremely singular. And, anytime you sit down with a person with a business mind, they're asking you to do the opposite. They're saying, how can you water this down? How can you shrink its footprint? How can you scale it? And that was I'm just not interested. I'm just not interested.
Can you charge more for it?
Yeah, and I do. And that's been a huge part of the process is sort of trying to find that sweet spot of charging the correct amount to pay for labor and time while also making it a thing that, makes financial sense for my customers to continue to come back for. And I will probably be dancing that dance for, maybe the rest of my life. But to answer your question, I started working with a business coach maybe 5 years ago, which has been astronomically helpful because she understands a lot of things that I don't and taught me a lot of things about just implementing systems in ways that never would have occurred to me as someone without a business background. So that's been a huge help. She's also made me a lot braver about, asking for things and advocating for more and thinking in smart ways about who my ideal client is rather than coming at it from a perspective of I just need any, opportunity to do what I do and show what I do.
Jen, what about an agent? Have you ever had an agent?
I have never had an agent. I've had a couple conversations that did not bear fruit. And for a long time, I really desperately wanted one, just because I was feeling so kind of vulnerable in these conversations with clients, and the idea of having to be the person to negotiate a contract or advocate was really daunting. I can now pretty happily say that I've been doing it long enough that I'm very comfortable doing it for myself. The agent issue is a little tricky because there are pretty clear-cut agents for people who are cookbook authors, high-profile restaurant chefs, food influencers, models who cook food. I'm not any of those things and have no plans to be. So anytime I kind of enter in a conversation with an agent, they're sort of eager to put you in one of those boxes. And, when I am not really in any of those boxes, those conversations tend to fizzle out. And I also have a pretty long-standing gut resistance to, positioning myself as like a visible figure or lifestyle person or anyone who's like regularly making, short-form content or
Why? Why is that?
Because I hate doing it. I think it's a whole other job.
What if someone helped you do it?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that still feels like a different job from what I do. And I'm sure you can relate. It's just like, I just want to make the work. Like, we're here for the work. I love the work. Let's look at the work. Let's not look at the person making the work. I think if someone handed me like a free video content producer and editor who just like hung out in my studio and made beautiful things and it didn't impede my process at all, I would be like, great, let's do it. No problem. But that person has not materialized quite yet. So for now, I'm resisting until people like show up and put a gun to my head and make me do it, which does happen occasionally. But
excuse my ignorance, but who are the folks that make fruit or hamburgers or whatever on commercials, print, or television look pretty?
Those are food stylists.
So those are food stylists.
Yeah, which is adjacent to what I do, and often what I do is technically called food styling.
Okay, and where do you draw the line between what you do and that profession?
Yeah, they're related and there's often overlap. I usually think of what food stylists do as stuff that is purely for the camera. It's not actually intended to be eaten. And I occasionally do those jobs, but it's pretty rare. Most of what I do is for events where, yes, they're made to be heavily photographed, but they're also destined to, end up in someone's mouths at the end of the day. For example, I had a friend ask me to sort of food style a shoot for her glassware and, homeware design studio. And it was a lot of things that I didn't know how to do when you talk about, hamburgers or fruit, how to make those things beautiful for the camera, how to make a stack of pancakes that's, 3 feet tall, or how to make an apple look glossy in the right way. I don't really know how to do that stuff. So I was like kind of like Googling, like, how do you make milkshake stay cold in front of camera? It's a really technical skill set, and it's not one that I super know a lot about, but it's really cool. It just is very, very, very different from real cooking. I say real without any sense of judgment because it's very related to what I do, but it's not cooking in the sense that people are supposed to eat it.
I've never yet eaten your food. I've only seen it, and it is very visually stunning.
Thank you.
Is bold. It's almost arresting.
Cool.
It's, it evokes real, emotion, reaction, right? I assume that's part of the intention. That's by design. Goal. Yeah. But talk to us about this balance between the visual, which is super prevalent, and taste and those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is always to do both. Sometimes you succeed more on one front than the other, and I think that's probably the case with any kind of traditional cooking too, is, that grilled cheese that I sent out earlier really looked like just like a melted pile of shit, but it tasted incredible, or, vice versa, is you go to a really fancy restaurant and it's all just this very sort of tweezer core, hyper-stylized plating, and it doesn't really taste like much. So, that's not an unusual dance to be doing in a culinary capacity. The only difference is that I'm just really leaning into the visuals too. And it's tough because, as we were talking about earlier, it's like what you do is so many logistical challenges. What I do is so many, variables, many of which are not in your control. And so it's just even more considerations to be weighing at any given moment is like, what if my server team doesn't show up? Or what if the refrigerator goes out? Or what if it's, I wrote a menu with a lot of really humidity sensitive, like fiddly pastry work, and then it's monsooning the day that the event happens, which like that happens all the time. So it's, it's just doing the dance of variables. And the longer you do this, the more you can kind of see those considerations from further away and plan accordingly for them. I was packing up, one of my teammates who helps me a lot, we make these like kind of sculptural bread snakes, and we were packing them up for an event. And I kind of said to her casually, yeah, like I'm assuming that at least 2 of these are going to break in transit. And she kind of looked at me and she was like, in any other field, like you saying that would be a really pessimistic or like a negative way of thinking. But it's just kind of what you have to plan for because you've done this enough and that's probably true. And I said, yeah, it doesn't feel pessimistic to me at all. It feels like the opposite. It feels like if I can get out in front of it, then I'm avoiding it being a big problem later. And it actually feels really good to know that. So it's the same with, these considerations about taste versus form versus function. I'm so grateful that anyone would ever entrust me with their body by like putting something that I made for them in it. I think that's such an incredible vote of trust and confidence. And people do it, every single day when they eat food that comes from anywhere. And I know that it isn't like all about me, but I never want to take that for granted. And I never sort of want to waste anyone's time or stomach volume with something that I don't think can justify its own presence as food. So, we always want to take that really seriously and try to make things that are delicious and tell a story in addition to being visually compelling.
What compels or propels you? You strike me, if I can be candid, as something of an auteur.
Thank you.
Because you mentioned the word control in many different capacities. You are painstaking. And my guess is that it's required to get to the level of quality that you exhibit. I think there's certainly parallels in the built environment. There's just this notion of control and precision, and you can tell when it's there and when it's not. But you also mentioned, on the other hand, the large number of variables that are outside of your control, the weather being one of them, people, your clients being the other. And I can imagine it being very challenging when the weather is one thing, but what happens when you have a client that doesn't comply? When you have a client that doesn't recognize that you need to bake in the fact that 2 of your bread snakes are going to break before you get them to site, and so you need to build that into the cost. Having all of those sort of logistical, administrative, components go wrong or right in an unpredictable way, I could see for some folks be very exhausting. And over time, there's a desire to maybe step away from that or to put someone in between that part of it and the design, the ideation, the creative direction. Do you fantasize about that? Or tell us about how you stay interested and engaged and imagine you will be interested and engaged in years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit a bunch of nails on their respective heads. It is exhausting, and I suspect there's a lot of overlap with what you do in terms of, trying to manage many different sets of expectations simultaneously, including your own. I think you said it perfectly correctly, is that my kind of long-term dream would to be functioning more as a creative director and less as a pair of hands, more as just like a person who makes the pitch decks and writes the menu proposals and then kind of like steps away. Because events work is, as I kind of keep circling back to, it's pretty exhausting. It's a lot of really long days and late nights and just constant schlepping of stuff around. So I would love to be maybe kind of like a masthead that just like gets rolled out a few times a year and gets to, maybe run off to a compound upstate and flee the city altogether. But I'm not there yet because of, these concerns of quality control that we keep kind of coming back to, and still being interested and still, wanting the hands that are on the work to be my own. Because as I'm sure you're both extremely sympathetic to, there are a lot of things you can teach in the technical realm, but there's a lot of creative specificity that you kind of can't teach. I don't have any kind of formal art training, but so often when I'm, building a tablescape with my team, I can be working with people who've worked with me for many years, and we know each other so intimately, and they understand what I want and what I like and what my visual tastes are, but they still are going to put an object just 2 inches to the left of where I would put it,
What part of that is, I don't know, for lack of subjective versus objective? The 2 inches variance from where you want it to be.
It's totally
is it
subjective.
Your style?
Yeah.
Or can you say quite convincingly that it makes a meaningful difference and there's some heuristic there?
Yeah, I think both of those things are true. I think it's fully subjective. I have no clear argument that, this is the correct way or this is from a classical composition way what it is, but I think it is also the difference between it being mine and it not being mine, or looking like mine and not looking like mine. And I think, that in itself kind of is the heuristic difference. Does it mean it's better than, it being 2 inches to the left? No, but it's just that, specificity that makes it one's own.
Drew, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's this fundamental difference between the artist or auteur versus someone who is the principal of a design studio, which is the position that I'm in. So I really have the mandate, from my perspective, of empowering and enabling talented designers in my studio to create. And I necessarily have to step back. I'm in a position of designer and director and editor, and that means necessarily compromising. And
it's not always easy.
It's not always easy. But arguably and experientially, I can attest, you end up getting better results. I mean, oftentimes people in my studio have better ideas and can achieve better results than I can achieve on my own. I mean, it's also true when you think about designers working with builders. That's a relationship that's born by necessity. And good designers working with good builders can achieve much better results than trying to go at it on their own, right? We've seen that bear out. I wonder if there's some version of this for you, right? And even certain things that you can determine repeat themselves. Armatures, just as an example, that help you create forms and structure them in a way that don't fail. Things like that. It would, of course, mean giving up some control and giving up some creative authority too, but you arguably would get more of what you're looking for, more physical relief, more personal freedom, less stress.
Yeah.
Cliche question. How is artificial intelligence affecting your industry? I'm guessing the production of food is not necessarily an area, but the visuals, when you're talking about making apples look shiny and juicy, is something that Nano Banana or some other technology can do quite well. And I certainly think it might affect the premium clients might place on your time and product. How are you seeing that now and in the future?
It's not a cliche question. It's the thing on everyone's minds. I think the broader concern is kind of what you just alluded to, is that it has just as a whole changed the value of time and artisanship and labor and devalued all those things, arguably. So I think about that in the capacity of my job and really any job, and especially any kind of creative job. I feel deeply blessed that most of my work, it lives in the physical. And for the time, and same for you as well, for the time being, AI can't really touch that physical space and that aspect of what I do. I make no assumptions about the longevity of that statement, but I think the aspect of food that it's most going to kind of attack first is going to be kind of what you were talking about with food styling, where, it's imagery that exists purely for photo and isn't really meant to be encountered in real life in the physical space. I don't do a lot of that kind of food styling where it's like, make the burger look juicy for the camera, mostly just because I don't really, like I said earlier, don't know how to do that stuff very well. But I do think that's kind of one of the first jobs on the culinary chopping block, as it were, because you can do a pretty serviceable job of it with AI imagery, which is a bummer because, media production and photo shoots are a pretty major cornerstone of lots of different kinds of creative work. And I know a lot of people who are food stylists like that for a living, and they do photo shoots every single day and are so talented and can do all sorts of really creative things. But it's becoming replaceable by an inferior product, so it's a bummer. The thing that has touched my work most directly, I think, about it is that I have clients asking me for like AI mock-ups of what I'm suggesting quite a bit. And I've dabbled in it a little. I really don't like doing it because I don't like showing people an image that isn't going to look like the finished product, because then they have that in their minds. And I'm sure you run into this in some capacity with what you do too, is they think something is going to look a certain way. And then I worry that when it looks like something else, they're going to think that I didn't do it right, when it's actually the other way. It's like the AI mock-up didn't do it right, but it was just the kind of clumsy way that I had of showing them something. I don't really know how to use like SketchUp. I'm not very good with Photoshop. So it's definitely the most obvious way to kind of paint people a picture, as it were. But I don't like doing it. I get pitch decks often from clients that are so visibly made so haphazardly in AI. Even the language in them was written with AI. They don't make any sense. They don't say anything. The visuals are pretty watered down and useless. It feels like somebody typed in the prompt, like, make it seem like I thought about what this event would look or feel like without actually having done any meaningful work or consideration. And the AI kind of spits out a PDF deck of just nothing.
It's interesting that clients are coming to you wanting to be a participant in the creation. I would have thought, because your work is so unique, people are coming to you for your work and for you to create something for them. Who are your clients, and why are they coming to you? What is it that they're looking for?
Well, I suspect you run into similar issues too. I mean, without knowing too much about who your clients are, people are coming to you for your expertise, your vision, your aesthetic sensibility, and they want to feel like they were a part of that conversation, right? That they had a hand in it. They want to be told that they have good taste too, and that they have good ideas too, right? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So that's often the kind of push-pull of what working collaboratively in any creative field is with the people who are ultimately, in charge of your paycheck. It's delicate. I do work with a ton of really talented people. I work with a lot of really talented, seasoned event producers who have great ideas and know how to implement them cleverly. But sometimes I work with clients who, maybe haven't done a lot of events work, or I worked with a really, really big brand last month who I'm not going to name, but it was they're a massive chain, like big conglomerate all over every city in America. And they had never done an influencer event before. So there was this really major trepidation of like, that seems kind of weird, or like, I don't know if people are going to like that, or uncertainty about how people were going to respond. And, we got them there. We got them to take some risks and, try something new. And the response was, they were really pleased. They were like, oh my God, I get it now. And but there were so many legal considerations about, how their product was going to be displayed. And every time, you get a menu component confirmed, you have to get it approved with like 35 different higher ups. So then it stops being a creative conversation and it turns into a legal one, and just getting things greenlit by the right people. Not every project is like that, obviously, but some of them are. To your question of who my clients are, I would say most of them are in the fashion and beauty space, but I also work with a lot of arts companies, art spaces, with galleries. I work with a number of design clients, like, furniture and interior design. Probably a lot of people that you're crossing paths with in different capacities too. It really varies. I've done a number of projects for, social media companies. I did something for Pinterest last year. I did something for Instagram last year, which was confusing because all of my work is kind of for Instagram. So then to actually do something for Instagram was like...
It's very meta, no pun intended.
It's very meta, but I haven't worked for them yet and I have no plans to. Although I guess they own Instagram. So yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it's really in lots of different kinds of spaces. I work for fewer food companies than you would think. I was kind of breaking out a list of my previous clients in different subcategories, and the food companies had like 3 clients in it, which was notable. Maybe it's too much competing vision or something, I'm not sure.
But are they coming to, in order to be able to invite guests into an experience, or are they coming to achieve something specific themselves? Or I imagine it's some mix of both.
It's some mix of both. The typical event that I work on is, they're trying to promote or roll out their own product or agenda by bringing in, influencers, editors, press, VIP clients, et cetera, into their own space to sort of engage with their product. So on my maybe slightly more cynical days, I kind of think of what I do as working in advertising, because I'm literally trying to help them sell a product to their clients.
I mean, you could say that about the whole world.
Sure. We're all selling something.
At the end of the day, it's all becoming advertising.
Yeah.
What do you think the lasting, call it medium term or even short term, but something beyond the immediate experience of going to one of your events, what is the impact of what you do on the clients that you serve and the folks that attend, aesthetic or otherwise?
I think the client's goals are, and I hope this doesn't sound cynical, but I think they're really metrics driven. I think they are clicks and eyeballs and circulation and visibility, because that's what, helps move their own brand visibility or their own product or whatever their angle is. I think for me, it's, kind of chasing what Drew alluded to earlier, is that kind of confrontational feeling that people have when they, see food doing something that they maybe haven't seen it or experienced it doing before. I'm always sort of trying to push that a little bit and, give people a little bit of a gut punch, when they first walk into the room or when their plate first lands in front of them or however it is that they're experiencing it. What first brought me to food is it's, really overwhelming sensory and physical tactility. And as a kid, I remember the movies and books and stories that I was most drawn to always had a really strong food component. And
what are some examples?
Yeah, well, the kind of classic millennial example is Hook, which I don't know if either of you. Yeah, it's become, in my world, sort of trite now. It's like making work inspired by the food fight scene in Hook, but that's been a really consistent thing over my career, is people kind of saying like, oh, this reminds me of that. And it's, the food fight scene that I'm thinking of is so overwhelmingly tactile and sensory and explosive and fun and chaotic. That movie was a huge influence for me. And then in my later adult life, the movie The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, which I don't know if you are nodding, yeah, really important design movie as well. And that's kind of a big part of what got me where I am, and arguably what got me like in this chair today is thinking about food in this design capacity and this spatial capacity. For context, it's a movie about a restaurant. So most of it takes place there's a split between the back of house and the front of house. And it's all extremely designed as these like very formalistic tableaus, and color is a huge part of the story as well. So the kind of kitchen area back of house is all designed and lit really, really green. And then the front of house is just this really saturated red, hyper stylized, really, really rigorous. And it's just such a canonical and formative movie for how I thought about, food and about space.
There are two questions that we ask to close out. The first one is, what are you doing wrong? And what are you doing to fix that?
What am I doing wrong? God, so many things. This is maybe a right answer in my world, but I would like to be never throwing away any food. And I feel even ashamed to be admitting that I do on air, because in the food world, it's such bête noire. And we're all supposed to pretend that we are taking very logistically complicated steps to completely eliminate food waste, but it's completely impractical in the events world just because of the way things are structured. I hate it, and it's become somewhat normalized, and what I am doing to fix it doesn't feel like enough. The thing that we have started implementing in the past couple years is that every single time we do an event, we are bringing a stack of those brown kind of craft paper to-go boxes, and we're aggressively packing up every single thing that's left over at the end of the night, giving it to staff, giving it to guests, forcing my team to take home a 10-pound bag of radishes that I'm told they're going to turn into kimchi when they get home, but I don't know because I'm not there. So those are some of the steps. We are starting to work with composting partners who show up at the end of an event and pick up bags of compost. But that's tricky too, because you're working with timing that you can't always have a lot of control over. And it's often a scale of food that doesn't really make sense to warrant someone picking, if we're talking about maybe 10 pounds of food, it just how can you justify paying somebody to come do a pickup for that sort of thing? It's such a nasty thing to have to acknowledge or talk about, but it literally keeps me awake at night. I hate it, and I hate what it says more broadly about the commodification and the luxury aspect of what I do, which are two words that I don't think should ever be in the same sentence as food, but they are by definition with what I do, and I hate it. So I think the kind of broader goal is to always be really trying to tie our clients into those conversations too, and make them see that this isn't like some neurotic thing that only I am doing. This is like an important part of what they should want their brands to be and what they should be willing to pay for and what they should be willing to do extra logistical work to help implement.
I love that.
And I'm sure there is for a lot of what you do is like, disposal and materials and sourcing and
it's a massive problem.
Yeah, it's a massive problem.
The second question we always ask is a request rather than a question for you to pose a question that goes into the pool for our next set of guests, something sort of broad that provokes thought in the same way that the question that Drew asked you. So what is one question, if you could ask anything, of folks that are in your industry that they all had to answer, let's say, what would that question be?
In my industry specifically? That's a very thought-provoking question. I think something I kind of keep coming back to is this belief that I've had for a long time that I think might be a little bit naive, that there can be and is beauty in commercial work. And I have to believe it because it's what I do. And I see it around me with, so many different talented people in different capacities. But I think something I think about a lot, particularly with regards to food, is how can we continue to center that beauty as a goal in spite of all of the noise, in spite of the push for metrics, in spite of trying to figure out how to run a financially viable business, which some people are prioritizing more than others, obviously, in spite of the way social media turns images into these really turn and burn commodities, and the speed at which we're expected to work. And I suspect you probably have been feeling that too, is that the turnover for any kinds of creative project, regardless of how technically demanding or difficult or complicated they are becoming faster and faster as we live in a society that consumes images faster and faster. That speed feels like it's really kind of bearing down on me. And so to try to squish that into a question is just, how, as a creative person in my field, in any field, do you center that need for beauty, for creative integrity, for specificity to what you do against all of those kind of capitalistic, larger, more imposing demands that are kind of bearing down on anyone in any creative field?
I love that question.
Great question.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. So many great questions.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
That was Jen Monroe, a chef, artist, and food designer. Her company Bad Taste is committed to exploring new ways of thinking about food. She's on her way to becoming a creative director rather than being at the center of making food in her work. You can follow her journey on her website, badtaste.biz, and on her Instagram handle, which is also badtaste.biz. Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this conversation valuable, share it with a friend or colleague, and subscribe to the Brick and Wonder podcast for more deep dives this season. The Brick and Wonder podcast is produced by Shayna Danziger, with sound engineering by Garrett DeBlock. The production and editing staff also included Brick and Wonder team members Ed Thompson, Carrie Potter, Roya Osuli, and Alex Kozen. I'm Drew Lang, and you've been listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast.